Even though franchises seem to dominate the entertainment industry, from TV shows to movies to video games, they're not invincible. For example, in the gaming industry, where you have long development times and massive production budgets, there will be a lot of pressure on many new releases, especially if those releases are part of a beloved series. A failed entry into a major gaming franchise can do an impressive amount of damage that's sometimes irreversible. Even the biggest franchises can only survive for so long. Welcome to HotFix Gaming. I'm Joy, and today let's look at the top 10 video games that are said to have ruined their respective franchises. It's important to note, before we get into this video, that these are not particularly bad games. Some of them may have just strayed a little too far from the series' blueprint, which caused fans to dislike them. So, with that said, let's get started. Number 10. Red Faction Armageddon. After the open terrain of Mars depicted in Red Faction Guerrilla, returning to the tunnels in Armageddon seemed like a massive step back for the fans of the franchise. Red Faction Armageddon had a significant reduction in what there was to destroy, and gave a gun that would disintegrate the structure instead of blowing them up. Part of the fun was causing mayhem, not keeping things tidy. This was so bad that it was believed to be one of the reasons that THQ went bankrupt, thus destroying any hope that Red Faction could ever return to its former glory. Hopefully someone buys the rights and at least tries to give it another chance. Number 9. Bubsy 3D. Let's be honest, the original games were considered average at best, but Bubsy 3D really managed to take it up a notch compared to its predecessors. The game nowadays serves as a what not to do in terms of transitioning from 2D to 3D, with its stiff controls, terrible jumping sections, disorienting camera, and poor graphics even for the 90s. The first game in the series managed to amass a cult following, while the second somehow destroyed that reputation, but Bubsy 3D really destroyed everything that was likable about the two prior games. The cat plays like a battle tank, and the environments are jumbled messes of textureless polygons. But on the bright side, the studio behind it has seen better days since, having released Days Gone. Number 8. Medal of Honor Warfighter. For a long time, it was believed that the Medal of Honor franchise was destined to become one of the biggest names in gaming. The original games were actually considered some of PS1's most notable titles. But that praise will soon come to an end. With so many of the core people who worked on the game leaving to go work on the Call of Duty franchise, Medal of Honor was left in the dust, with no way to keep up. The series' struggles were made clear with the 2012 title, Medal of Honor Warfighter. In every respect, it felt like a game approved by a major publisher that was desperately trying to catch up with a competitor that had left them in the dust long ago. Fans and critics were united in their contempt for the game's complacency. Though the 2020 VR title Medal of Honor Above and Beyond actually offered a sometimes interesting reminder of why the series once worked, it's doubtful that we'll ever get a major Medal of Honor game that comes close to recapturing the series' glory days. Number 7. Dino Crisis 3. Resident Evil, but with dinosaurs, worked great with the first two Dino Crisis games, but something happened with the third one. Capcom released Dino Crisis 3, a game that took place in space but felt antiquated even in 2003. Although Dino Crisis 3 doesn't deviate too much from Capcom's survival horror formula, the game is hampered by an awful dynamic camera and a setting that lacks much of an identity. After this game, Dino Crisis became that property Capcom pretends doesn't exist. Number 6. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Since we're on the topic of Capcom, here's another one. Marvel gave one of the best fighting game developers ever access to their amazing roster of heroes and villains and told them to just do their magic. For the first 3 releases, it was magic. However, the 4th installment in the series, not including spin-offs and similar releases, had a roster that was disappointing at best, clunky animations, and a bland art style. However, with all this disappointment, there is still hope that one day we'll get a better sequel to Infinite. Number 5. Crackdown 3. Sure, the first 2 Crackdown games were not perfect, but they were good sandbox games that somehow also doubled as superhero adventures. There was still hope that the series would realize its potential and achieve greatness somewhere down the line. But Crackdown 3 really put an end to all that hope. It was remarkably similar to a game that came out 12 years before its debut in many major respects, yet it was somehow worse than the original Crackdown game in nearly every way but its visuals. And even then, they weren't even worth bragging about. Worst of all, the game was missing many of the previously announced features that were supposed to set it apart from earlier games in the series, which really just sealed its reputation as one of the Xbox One's biggest software failures. Number 4. Earthworm Jim 3D. As a general rule, if you add 3D to a popular game series, the resulting game probably won't be very good. Borrowing heavily from popular platformers like Super Mario 64 as well as the Earthworm Jim animated series, EWJ 3D exists only to cash in on a trend. By the end of production, Jim's creator, Doug Tennaple, was dismissed from the project. The resulting game was left with terrible camera angles and nearly impossible jumps. Earthworm Jim 3D is by no means an irredeemable mess, but it strips the license of most of its personality, lacking the colourful and memorable backgrounds and inspired humour of the first two games. Earthworm Jim 3D plays very much like your bog-standard early 3D platformer, and the world simply didn't need another mediocre entry in that genre. One more awful Earthworm Jim game was released for Game Boy before Jim went back underground indefinitely. Number 3. Dead Space 3. Yet another third entry to a series that seems like it just didn't work. This video really starts to sound like developers were set on proving that the saying, "third time's a charm," is wrong. The original Dead Space from 2008 really legitimized the survival horror genre. The second Dead Space was more or less the same as the first, but with a slight tilt towards action and less towards survival horror. Still, fans weren't bothered by that. Dead Space 3, however, was a chance for EA to return to its survival horror roots. But instead of doing that, the publisher doubled down on the action-heavy, cutscene-driven, heartless pace of Dead Space 2, really pushing their fans away from the franchise. But hey, at least you can play it with a friend, right? And let's not even begin to talk about the famous microtransactions EA is so fond of. Dead Space 3 was the first game in the series to include them. Surprisingly, in an interview with Eurogamer, creative director Ben Wannert had confirmed that the initial pitch for the finale did not include any microtransactions or action-heavy elements. It was suggested that the way the game ended up was EA's doing, as they had particular sale expectations and have even went as far as saying that the game had to sell 5 million copies if the franchise was to continue being funded by the publisher. Number 2. Dead Rising 4. The original Dead Rising was a huge deal for a lot of horror fans, allowing them to live out their dark dreams of surviving a zombie apocalypse. As the series evolved, it managed to retain much of the qualities that made the original Dead Rising as special as it was. However, somewhere around Dead Rising 3, fans started to feel a slight shift. Then it happened, with Dead Rising 4 in 2016. To be honest, it's not a bad game, but its main problem is that it tried to reach a much wider audience at the cost of the wants and requests of the franchise's biggest fans. Longtime fans were turned off by the game's drastic change in tone, removal of foundational survival elements, and other changes that were seemingly made to make the whole experience more accessible than ever before. Number 1. Duke Nukem Forever. Duke Nukem is considered by many an icon of 90s gaming, but its last installment really bombed. The game spent 14 years in developmental hell, and when it finally released, it was obvious. The game played, felt, and looked like something from a past console generation, and not in a charming, nostalgic way. Stuffed with lazy, gross humor that only manages to make Duke feel incredibly old, Forever can't even boast to have fun gameplay, as the shotgun is the only weapon that actually delivered. While it's been well over 10 years since the last installment, and no rumors of a sequel, maybe Duke Nukem Forever really is the end. And maybe it's for the best. But what do you think of these franchises? Do you have any other video games that you think have failed their series? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in our next video.